Hi, this is Jaya. In this video, we shall see the summary of Tinkers by Paul Harding. Tinkers is Paul Harding's debut novel, and this story is about a dying man called George Washington Crosby. And here, George thinks about his past and his family history. He mostly thinks about his father's life and also about the themes of mortality, memory, and the interconnectedness of generations. This novel won the 2010 Pulitzer Prize for Fiction and 2010 Penn Robert W. Brigham Prize. Here the story goes like this. George Washington Crosby is at home on his deathbed and he loses himself in memories from his past. He recalls his passion for repairing clocks, which he discovered that his love for fixing clocks after he bought a broken clock at a tag sale and received an 18th century repair manual with it. He hallucinates that his house collapses around him and that he falls to his basement workshop where he is surrounded by clocks. At this time, George thinks about his father, Howard Aaron Crosby, who was a traveling salesman and tinker and who traveled across rural Maine with his wagon of everyday goods. Howard has epilepsy, although he and his wife Kathleen keep this a secret from their children. Howard enjoys fixing things, but he sometimes does not even charge people for the work he does. He also finds it difficult to sell his goods as the people around them are not wealthy and are very much afraid to spend their money. As a result, Kathleen often criticizes him. Days before his death, George wakes in the night to see his grandson Charlie sitting by his side and he is reading a book. It is very quiet and George finds the silence startling. It is at that time he realizes that all the clocks that he had surrounded himself have stopped ticking, and Charlie tells him that George's wife told Charlie not to wind them so that George could rest peacefully without the ticking of the clocks disturbing him. But George always associates the clock's silence with the coming silence of his own heart. Panicked, he convinces Charlie to wind the clocks. While shaving George, another grandson Sam cuts him and the blood causes a stir. The family works to change George's clothes and sheets, and afterwards George begins to ponder the legacy he will leave behind and what his grandchildren and great-grandchildren will remember about him. He recalls a night when Howard comes home late because he has a seizure. George minds his younger siblings as Kathleen helps Howard clean up. The only seizure that George sees his father having occurs on Christmas Day in 1926. Howard begins conversing as he slices the ham and he falls hitting his head. Kathleen asks George to help and George puts a spoon in his father's mouth to stop Howard from biting his tongue. When the spoon breaks, George tries to retrieve the pieces from Howard's mouth, but Howard ends up biting George's hand and the bite is so severe that it needs stitches. When Kathleen consults the doctor about Howard's epilepsy, he gives her a pamphlet for a hospital where people with intellectual disabilities are committed. George is disturbed by the events at home and with conflicted feeling towards his parents, he runs away. Kathleen sends Howard after George, and when he leaves the house, she puts a pamphlet for the hospital out in the open. George hides in a friend's shed. Howard actually hopes that George makes it far to a new life and is actually disappointed when he finds him. He brings George back home and notices the pamphlet that Kathleen has left. Howard decides to leave the family and the next day he sets out with the intention to never return. Howard recalls his own childhood and his father, who was a preacher who had an illness that weakened him both mentally and physically. Howard watched his father's decline with fear and shame. One day, Howard's parents got into a carriage together, but only his mother returned, saying that his father was gone. After his father's disappearance, Howard tried to find him in the natural world. He walked into a pond until only his head remained above water, and he was determined to stay in this position all night. The next morning, some hunters found Howard unconscious by the pond and brought him back to their camp to warm him up. When he woke, Howard wandered off alone and experienced his first seizure. Afterwards, Howard felt like he had had a brush with death, and as a result, he came to see life as a fragile miracle. After Howard leaves his family in Maine, he settles in Philadelphia where he finds a job working in a grocery store. He works hard and has creative ideas, and he quickly advances to management. He takes a new name and marries a woman named Megan who is talkative and caring. Despite his happy new life, Howard remains haunted by memories of his children. In January 1972, Howard tells Megan of his new idea and that he has a shadow itself that lives another life, and that night he dies in his sleep. Nearly 2 decades before this, on Christmas Eve 1953, Megan goes to Pittsburgh alone to care for her ailing mother. Howard takes this opportunity to find George. He borrows a car from a friend and drives to Enon, MA. George recalls opening the door to find his father on his doorstep. Howard only stays for a brief time, introducing himself to his grandchildren and asking George about his siblings. This is the last scene George remembers before he dies, and here ends the story. If you have anything more to add on to what I've said, please write it in the comment box. Like the video, share it with your friends, and if you're not subscribed my channel, please subscribe and support. Thank you.